Kevin here again for Module 5 of the Ninja Japanese Sentence Formula. In this module, we're going to talk about verb tenses. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing to note is that Japanese verbs that you pull straight from the dictionary are already in their future tense. A lot of the times in English, we'll append a will in front of the verb. For example, I will go to Japan, for example, to indicate future tense. But in Japanese, that's not necessary. So let's look at an example. And the example we're going to look at is biru o nomu. So nomu is the dictionary form of the word drink that you'll find in the dictionary. And this translates to I will drink beer. To get the verb into its past tense form, for example, if you wanted to say I drank beer instead of I will drink beer, you need to change the verb into its ta form. So in our example, the ta form of nomu, drink, is nonda. Nonda. So the sentence would become biru o nonda, and now you have the past tense form. For the present tense, we want to use the te form of the verb and add the letters iru to the end of it. So for our beer drinking example, our present tense of the sentence would be biru o nondeiru. Biru o nondeiru. I am drinking beer. And just as a side note, this is all casual speech. I'll go over how to use more polite Japanese and convert between present and past tense a little bit later. But as you can see, the key to understanding past and present tenses is getting a firm grasp of the te form and the ta form. But luckily for us, the rules for changing a verb into its te form and ta form are exactly the same, so that makes our life a lot easier. So let's take a look at that. As you might remember from Module 4, there are three main types of verbs, type 1, 2, and 3 verbs. These types are going to come into play again for understanding the te form and ta form. So if you need a refresher, I would recommend you go back to Module 4 to look over that section one more time before we continue. But let's start with type 1 verbs. And the key to conjugating type 1 verbs into their te form and ta form is looking at the last letter or last syllable of the word. Type 1 verbs are definitely the most difficult to conjugate into their te form and ta form because there are different rules depending on what that last letter or syllable is. I'm going to lay them out for you here. But if you have some problems or have some trouble remembering them, I recommend going online and doing a search because there's a lot of good memory aids out there. I know there are a few te form songs out there that various teachers have made over the years that are really great memory aids for understanding or remembering these rules rather. So if the last letter of the word is either a nu, mu, or bu, then you just drop that last letter and change it to nda for the ta form or de for the te form. Going back to our previous example with the verb nomu, you can remember that nomu, the ta form was nonda, and our te form was nonde. So we just drop the mu at the end, and we add the nda or nde for the ta form and te form respectively. For verbs that end in either ru, u, or tsu, we want to drop those last letters and just add a ta or te for the ta form and te form. For verbs that end in ku, we want to drop that ku and add ita for the ta form or ite for the te form. Similarly, for verbs that end with gu, we want to drop that gu sound and add a ida for the ta form or ide for the te form. And last but not least, for verbs that end in su, we want to drop that su sound and add a shita for the ta form or shite for the te form. So let's put these rules to use in some examples. We've already gone through one example with nomu, so nomu becomes nonda and nonde because it ends with mu. So let's look at another example. How about to use, which is tsukau. So as you can hear, the last letter there is u. So we want to use the u rule, which is to drop that sound and then add a ta or a te sound. So tsukau becomes tsukatta for the ta form and tsukatte for the te form. And you might be wondering what that double T represents, and this is actually equivalent to a small tsu and a big letter that you might see in hiragana. But essentially what that is, it's a different sound. So instead of reading the ta form as tsukata, it's tsukata. So kind of what it does is it indicates that you're supposed to hold on to that last sound and then let it go at the last minute. So an exaggeration would be tsukata and tsukate. So if you can kind of imagine like pulling on a rubber band, building some tension, and then letting it go. That's kind of what that double T represents. And you'll see that a lot in Japanese, so keep that in mind. So let's look at another example. How about to swim, which is oyogu. Oyogu. So if you can hear, the last letter there is gu. So referring to the previous page, if you have a verb that ends in gu, you want to drop the gu and add ida or ide for the ta form and te form. So we have oyogu becomes oyoida for the ta form and oyoide for the te form. So just for good measure, let's look at one more verb, and let's look at the verb to drop, like to drop your wallet. And drop in Japanese is otosu. So as you can hear, the last letter there is su. So referring to the previous page again, if you have a verb that ends in su, you want to drop this su and add a shita or shite for the ta form and te form. So otosu becomes otoshita and otoshite. All right, so that's kind of the way to use that chart on that previous page. And I recommend going to the dictionary, finding a few verbs, and trying a few of these out. Now let's look at type 2 verbs. As you may recall from Module 4, the key to conjugating type 2 verbs was just dropping the do. And luckily for us, it's the same for the te form and ta form. So all we need to do is just drop that do at the end of the word and add a ta or a te. So for example, to eat, taberu becomes tabeta and tabete. And looking at another example, sleep, neru becomes neta and nete. Pretty simple, right? Type 2 verbs are great. I mean, everybody loves type 2 verbs because they're so easy to conjugate. But I still encourage you to find a few of these in the dictionary and try them out on your own. Now all we're left with is type 3 verbs. And the key to type 3 verbs last module was memorization, and it's the same here because there's so few exceptions that it's just easier to remember them than it is to make a rule for them. So let's look at the first one, do, which is suru. The ta form is shita, and the te form is shite. And now looking at come, which is kuru, the ta form is kita, and the te form is kite. But there's actually one more that we have to go through, and that's the verb to go. And typically to go is, which is iku, is a type 1 verb, but for the ta form and te form, it doesn't exactly follow the same rules as the others, so it gets thrown into the exceptions list, or type 3 verbs. So to go is iku, and the past tense is, the ta form is itta, and the te form is itte. So those are the 3 ones that you're going to have to memorize, and those are your type 3 verbs for the te form and ta form. So as promised, I'm going to briefly go over polite Japanese and how to conjugate those types of sentences into their past and present tenses. So if you see the ending masu, then you know automatically that this is a polite sentence. To change that sentence into past tense, you just change masu to mashita, mashita, and that makes it past tense. To change it into present tense, what you want to do is take the verb that precedes masu, change it to its te form, and just add imasu. So it ends up being te imasu. So let's look at an example. Let's look at the sentence Tokyo ni ikimasu, which is I will go to Tokyo. If you wanted to say I went to Tokyo, you would change that to Tokyo ni ikimashita. So as you can see, I just dropped the mas and replaced it with mashita. Tokyo ni ikimashita. Okay? For the present tense, like I mentioned earlier, you want to change that verb, which is ikimasu, to the te form, itte, and then add imasu. So the present tense would be Tokyo ni itte imasu, like you're on the train and you're heading to Tokyo. I'm currently going to Tokyo. Tokyo ni itte imasu. So that concludes Module 5. I highly recommend you looking up some Japanese verbs and trying some of these rules out on your own, because the more you do it, the easier it's going to become, and that's always a good thing. With that said, we've got one more module to go, so I'll see you in Module 6 for adjective conjugation.